You find yourself watching the news or scrolling through social media, and once again, corruption in Africa is the headline. This time, it's about two prominent leaders, William Ruto, President of Kenya, and Bola Tinubu, President of Nigeria. Both have been named finalists of the OCCRP Person of the Year Award, but not for any noble reason. The title they're vying for? Among the world's most corrupt leaders of 2024. So, at this point, you can't help but feel a mixture of frustration, disappointment, and oddly enough, resignation. Well, I can't blame you. After all, isn't this just another chapter in a story you already know too well and are pretty much tired of? For decades, African nations have been plagued by corruption at the highest levels of power. The story of leaders exploiting national resources for personal gains isn't new. Yet, each time it happens, it feels like a fresh betrayal. Ruto's inclusion on the list is driven by mass public outrage over his government's passage of a controversial financial bill, soaring youth unemployment, and widespread perception of greed. The protests in Kenya during June and July 2024 saw young people demand accountability. Instead of a dialogue, the government responded with force, tear gas, water cannons, and even live ammunition. People were killed, injured, and some are even still disappearing to date in recent Kenyan kidnapping cases. Meanwhile, Tinubu's nomination stems from accusations of financial malpractice, forgery, and even links to drug trafficking. In Nigeria, citizens have had to contend with economic hardship, inflation, and unpopular policies, all under a government widely seen as serving the interests of a few at the expense of many. At this point, you may begin to wonder, how did we get here? And more importantly, where is Africa headed? You see, corruption in Africa isn't just a political problem. It's a social cancer. It permeates every aspect of life, from accessing basic services to securing employment. When you hear that someone in Kenya or Nigeria had to pay for a bribe just to get a passport or a government service, it doesn't shock you anymore. This has become normalized and is almost expected. Well, you might think that corruption exists everywhere, and you're right. No country is free from it, but the difference lies in its impact. In the West, corruption might mean tax loopholes and corporate lobbying, but systems still function for the average person. In places like Kenya and Nigeria, corruption can mean the difference between life and death. It means hospitals without medicines, schools without teachers, and roads that crumble into dust. What stands out the most is the growing distrust and frustration amongst ordinary Africans. When you talk to people or read their thoughts online, there's a clear sense that many have lost hope in their leaders. Comments on social media are filled with biting sarcasm and dark humor. Yet, beneath the humor lies a real pain. People are tired. They're tired of the cycle of bad governance, of leaders who promise change but only bring more of the same. And more importantly, they're tired of being told to be patient while they watch their country's wealth line the pockets of a few elites. And I know you might be there thinking that this doesn't affect you because you're neither Kenyan or Nigerian. But let me tell you something. The problem of corruption isn't confined to national borders. It affects the entire continent. When you see leaders like Ruto and Tinubu dominate headlines for the wrong reasons, it undermines Africa's image on the global stage. This fits the narrative that Africa is a continent of chaos and mismanagement, deterring potential investors and partners who might otherwise help drive development, and instead attracts the wrong players whose only goal is to exploit and profit off the rigged systems. But beyond how outsiders see Africa, it's about how Africans see themselves. When corruption becomes so pervasive, it erodes trust in institutions. Why bother voting if you believe the outcome is predetermined? Or why follow the law if those in power break it without consequences? This is the dangerous cycle you see playing out. A cycle where corruption breeds hopelessness, and hopelessness allows corruption to thrive. Despite the frustration, there's a recurring theme within the African people: the belief that solution must come from within. Yes, international pressures can help. Yes, global watchdogs and organizations play a role. But at the end of the day, it's up to Africans to demand better. Leaders must be held accountable, and Africans must refuse to normalize corruption. The Democratic Republic of Congo serves as a cautionary tale of what happens when corruption takes root. Blessed with vast natural resources that should have made it one of the wealthiest nations on earth, it has instead become synonymous with the curse of blood minerals. Its people suffer from conflict, exploitation, and poverty, trapped in a never-ending cycle of violence fueled by greed. And Kenya and Nigeria, two of Africa's largest economies, may eventually face the same fate. If they continue down this road, their long-term prosperity will always remain under threat, leading to uncertainty and destabilization across the continent. We must all stand together and call for the eradication of corruption in African culture. Regional bodies like the African Union need to step up and do more than just issuing statements. They need to act. So what about you? Where do you fit in all of this? You might feel powerless, just one person in a sea of millions, but change starts with awareness. By understanding the problem, talking about it, and refusing to accept it as a norm, you become part of the solution. You can demand transparency, you can support initiatives that promote good governance, and more importantly, you can vote and encourage others to do the same. So today, I urge all of you to refuse to let corruption win. It's easy to remain hopeless. It's easy to say that's just how things are. But history has shown that change is possible when people refuse to give up. You don't have to look far to find examples of leaders who governed with integrity or communities that rose up and demanded better. Do not lose hope. Keep fighting for a better Africa. As we reflect on the current situation, it's clear that Africa still has a very long way to go in its path to prosperity in its post-independence era. The task ahead isn't easy, and the challenges are immense. But let us not forget the immense potential of this great continent. Africa is a sleeping giant full of untapped thoughts and ideas yearning to meet reality. Countries like Kenya and Nigeria have vibrant, dynamic populations. They have resources, talent, and innovation. What they need are leaders who serve the people and not themselves. Before we conclude, I want to leave you with one important message. This is about believing that change is possible, not just in Kenya or Nigeria, but across the continent of Africa as a whole. It's about holding on to hope, even when things seem hopeless. Because without hope, without belief in a better future, nothing will ever change. You may not be there to see the results, but you must be there to plant the tree of a brighter future tomorrow.